Hi guys. Okay. So we're going to go over the DSM-5, what it is, and cluster B personality disorders. There are more than just one cluster of personality disorders. There's also the cluster A and the cluster C, but I'm going to specifically put our attention to cluster B because that's what I'm familiar with and that is what most interests me, but I can absolutely do videos on the other ones as well. So we're going to start with what is the DSM. DSM-5 stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It is the handbook used by healthcare professionals in the U.S. currently, and much of the world is the authoritative guide to diagnosing mental disorders. Within the DSM-5, you will find just about every mental disorder that you can think of. All the ones that we've cataloged are going to be here in the DSM-5. Currently, we're on the 5th edition of the DSM-5, and it's constantly being worked on to improve and reflect our cultural and scientific process in the field of psychology. The 5th edition was published in 2013, but the original was created in 1952. The DSM is not without its faults, and it can be seen as controversial. It has been criticized for its potential cultural biases, arbitrary division between normal versus abnormal psychologies, and has often had its validity and reliability of diagnosis taken into question. That being said, it is the best comprehensive manual we currently have, and we are constantly working to improve it. The DSM is only as good as our current understanding of psychology and mental disorders. As we progress, so shall it. So I'm going to touch on a couple of things. We are constantly updating and working on the DSM. The DSM is only as good as our understanding of psychology currently. As Dr. Mega3 has pointed out in the past, the DSM has categorized homosexuality as a mental disorder. And that's kind of what it's getting at when we say, like, it's been critiqued for cultural biases. That's an example of a cultural bias. At that time in America, we were not accepting of homosexuality, and it was categorized as a mental disorder. And you can imagine what that did to people and how much that stigmatized, because they were then seen as having a mental disorder. So this is what we mean by cultural biases can possibly impact how the DSM-5 is created, what's in there, you know, and that's not to say maybe in 50 years we'll have removed some of the things that we have currently in the DSM, but we are constantly working on it and trying to make it as inclusive as possible and as reflective of the time. So within the DSM-5, there is a category called personality disorders. Personality disorders are psychological disorders marked by inflexible, disruptive, and enduring behavior patterns that impair social and other functioning, whether the sufferer recognizes it or not. In total, the DSM-5 recognizes 10 distinct personality disorders: paranoid personality disorder, schizoid, schizotypal, antisocial, borderline, histrionic, narcissistic, avoidant, dependent, and obsessive-compulsive personality disorders. These are separated into 3 clusters, clusters A, B, and C. As I said, we're going to be focusing on cluster B, but the clusters are organized in the hallmarks and kind of running themes of the personality disorders in each cluster. So cluster A is known as the odd and eccentric behavior cluster. Cluster B is known as the dramatic and erratic, and cluster C is known as the avoidant, sort of detached personality disorders. So it mentions here, and I wrote here, that whether the person realizes it or not. When we're looking at personality disorders, we are looking at a person's personality, not necessarily just their brain functioning or typical disorders. This is a person's personality. This is who they are. So a lot of the times, not knowing that you have a personality disorder, it's so common. So if nothing in your life is going wrong, how would you know that your personality is not functioning the way it's supposed to, that it's not compatible with society and daily work and relational activities? How would you know that you have something wrong with you if there was nothing impacting your life negatively? So we've gone over this before, but to be diagnosed with a mental disorder of any type, you have to have come to find help or had to have been recommended to help, somehow gotten into a psychiatrist's office, and it has to have a clinically significant detriment on your life to be considered a disorder of any sort, meaning that it has to have a negative impact. You have to have had something that was negatively affecting your daily life. So unless that's the case, you can't really be considered to have a disorder. You have to have been diagnosed by a professional, and it has to have a significant detriment to your daily life. So moving on then to cluster B personality disorders. Cluster B, as I said, is the dramatic and erratic personality disorder cluster because of their hallmark characteristics of displaying overly dramatic and difficult to predict behavior. There are 4 personality disorders within this cluster: antisocial, borderline, histrionic, and narcissistic. As we see here, I have a couple of pictures. I think the Tiger King is a perfect example of like a grandiose narcissist. Not to say that he has it, like absolutely not. When we think of that, we kind of think of people like him. So narcissistic personality disorder, we're going to start with that. So according to the DSM-5, to be diagnosed with NPD, one must display 5 out of the 9 traits listed below. Grandiose sense of self-importance. So what this means is that they feel very superior. They feel like they have a wonderful sense of self. They are above the rest. And it can be very grandiose. It can be very over the top. As we see here with like a picture of Gaston, that would be a grandiose example here. A preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, and ideal love. A need for excessive admiration. So again, this is like boosting their ego. This is helping them confirm their ideas that they are the best. A sense of entitlement. Because they're the best, because they think they're above the rest, they also think that they deserve more than the other people because they are not other people. They are better. They deserve more. A belief that they are special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high status people or institutions. Interpersonally exploitative behavior. So right underneath it is a lack of empathy, and these go hand in hand. What this means is that they are willing to manipulate you and exploit you, basically willing to use you to get what they want. And it's kind of easy for them because they don't have a lot of empathy. They'll use you. It's easy. They're special. You're not. You're here to give them what they want, and they're going to take it. Envy of others or belief that others are envious of them. Being special as they are in their minds, it is natural for them to believe that other people are envious of how great they are. Like, why wouldn't they be? But there's another flip side to this, that they can be very envious of others. If somebody has, for example, a better car than them, a prettier girlfriend, maybe they have more achievements than them, maybe they're more liked, that can really do a number on their ego, and it can make them very envious of other people. It really sends them to a competitive mode because it kind of invalidates their feelings of superiority. If somebody else is more special than them, what does that make them? And that can really make them feel small. And then lastly is a demonstration of arrogant and haughty behaviors or attitudes. So I think this one's self-explanatory. It's basically meaning that they are special and they know it and they're going to show it. As with all personality disorders, NPD must be pervasive and cause clinically significant detriment and distress to the person. So NPD, as I kind of put right here as a note, is not to be confused with narcissism. Somebody can display all the traits of narcissistic personality disorder, but not have narcissistic personality disorder because they have not been diagnosed by a clinician and they have not had a serious detriment to their lives. Why would something be considered disorder if it's not having a negative impact on somebody's life? It isn't. It's not considered disorder. So even though you might know somebody who checks off for all of these, you might consider them in your head a narcissist. You might say that they have narcissistic qualities. They absolutely do. But that does not mean that they have narcissistic personality disorder. You need to have a clinical diagnosis, and it also has to bring distress and detriment to that person's life. It's just how it works. NPD is not to be confused with narcissism. You do have to have a diagnosis. All right, different types of narcissism. So there are different types of narcissists. This is just basically what we're going to go over right here. This is just different ways that narcissism can manifest itself in different individuals. So these are just kind of descriptions of narcissists, but the narcissistic core is what we just went over with the DSM-5 criteria. So this is just kind of explaining and different descriptors for different manifestations of narcissism in different people. There's the grandiose narcissist. So the grandiose narcissist is what we usually think of when we think of narcissism. We think of those people that are on their high horses, that think they are the coolest people. We think of people like Gaston from Disney. We think of, I don't know, I can't really think of a whole bunch of other people, but we think of people that are on their high horses and they know it and they are outgoing, they're extroverted, they're grandiose. The second one here is the covert narcissist. I think this one is one of the most interesting because we don't talk about it that much. The covert narcissist is not what we think of usually when we think of narcissism. They might have more of an introverted personality. They might seem a little bit more shy. They might even come across humble in a lot of situations. But that is not actually the case. It's usually just a disguise for their feelings of superiority. But they do usually genuinely have more of an introverted personality. So where the grandiose narcissist has a more extroverted personality, the covert narcissist is going to be more something manifested in somebody who has a more introverted personality type. So all different personality disorders are going to manifest differently between individuals. Everybody has different quirks about them, different things about them. Not everybody is an extrovert, not everybody is an introvert, and that's going to affect how your personality disorder or how your disorders in general are going to manifest with you. So the covert narcissist is going to be more of an introverted narcissist. This also might be somebody who is like very woe is me, the world is against me, I never get my way. They can show their superiority by, say, something bad happened to you. They might instead, when you go to them for help, they might be like, oh, you think your life is bad? Well, you wouldn't believe what I've been through. And in that way, they're kind of trying to weirdly like one up you with like the sad stuff. It's like the sad people Olympics. So that can be a show of superiority. They're trying to be superior in their like negative life experiences. Sometimes this can show up with a covert narcissist. Like what you might see is they might not be interacting in a group. They might be off to the side. They might seem kind of shy and kind of outcast. And you might feel kind of bad for them, and they might appear to be shy, but a lot of the times the covert narcissist, it's actually like they don't feel like that group is up to their level. Like they are better than them, so they're not going to interact, so they're going to be off to the side, and it might appear as shy and they might play it off that way, but with a covert narcissist, like that could be a manifestation. All right. The next is the malignant narcissist. So a malignant narcissist is like the mean-spirited narcissist. This is a person that is cruel, is mean, they don't care. So this is a dangerous narcissist. Not to say that all like they're all safe. None of them really are. All narcissism and being in relationships with narcissists, they do have higher rates of domestic violence and emotional abuse, but especially here with the malignant narcissist. So you have to be very careful, because the malignant narcissist is much more mean-spirited, and because of that, it can turn very negative very quickly. And because of the lack of empathy and because of the mean spirit, it's kind of a dangerous combo. But the malignant narcissist is going to be more of the mean, icky person. They're going to be crabby, and you're going to know it. They're going to think they're the best, and they will step on you. You don't matter to them. They're angry. They're going to get their way. They have a plan. You guys don't matter. They do. Next one is community narcissist. The community narcissist, this can be kind of like the people who like give food to the homeless and like record it every time, and it can be like very evident that it's not really about them giving food to the homeless. It's really about them looking good on camera. Not to say that everybody that records themselves doing that is a community narcissist, but like there can be, that's just like an example. There can be like instances where they'll donate things and they just have to tell everybody how much they donated, and they have to like pull every compliment they can out of people. They want to throw balls for themselves for their charity and good nature. So yeah, so this is the community narcissist. They often play themselves off as the giver and the selfless person, but it's not really about selflessness. It's about their ego. So here it says, I've written all narcissists suffer from a sense of low self-esteem, and they use their grandiosity and narcissistic traits to shield themselves from potential vulnerabilities. Narcissists will often partake in manipulative behaviors such as triangulation, gaslighting, guilt tripping, and other attempts to gain control. For a narcissist, they need to be in control and have a steady narcissistic supply. So basically what that means is that all narcissists, the reason they act the way they do is that they have a deep sense of like low self-esteem. They have some core wounds to them. They are deeply insecure people, and they need to project grandiosity and self-confidence and better than types of behaviors, because this protects them from that sense of low self-esteem. It is crippling how much is missing in them. It can be very crippling for them. So because of the low self-esteem, this is basically a defense mechanism to protect themselves from that. They don't want people to know that they're actually very vulnerable. They don't want people to know that they might have some childhood wounds, some trauma, some things going on. They don't have to have trauma, but this is basically just a defense mechanism. So even though they may appear very grandiose, even though they may appear very confident, it's not the truth. They're not actually very confident. This is just them projecting, basically. And they do, because of this need to be in control, because of this need to always be better and to be safe and to protect themselves from vulnerability, they do often partake in manipulative behavior, especially in any interpersonal relationships that they have. They may partake in triangulation, which is when they kind of try and pitch you against other people, and gaslighting, which is when they try and get you to question their reality, and guilt tripping and other attempts to gain control. Control is so necessary. When a narcissist is out of control, it can feel very, very unsafe. It can feel very dangerous to them. And a narcissist that feels out of control can be a dangerous person all in themselves. And they also need narcissistic supply. A narcissist needs to get some sort of supply of, yes, you're great, you're wonderful. They need somebody constantly patting their back and telling them how wonderful they are. They kind of feed off of other people. They need other people to tell them how wonderful they are. So that is what narcissistic supply means. Right here we have a pastor of, so this is a picture of this pastor of a mega church. He's what you would often think of either a grandiose narcissist, or he's even considered a community narcissist, because he takes himself as like a pastor, a person of God. He's the leader of a church. But what makes him narcissistic and what makes him sort of like a lame person, not that I cannot diagnose him. I don't even know if he has narcissistic personality traits truly, but from what I've observed, he owns multiple personal jets. He has millions upon millions of dollars. He owns multiple houses, and none of the money that he makes goes back to his community. And he's been critiqued about it a whole bunch of times. And when he's critiqued, he goes on fire. And it is the most interesting thing to watch because of his defensiveness and the way he plays it off as well. He's the spokesperson of God. There's that grandiosity, you know. So I put him here as an example. Very interesting person, honestly. Like, I don't like him at all, but it's interesting to watch. All right. So next up is going to be borderline personality disorder. So borderline personality disorder, or BPD, not to be confused with BD or bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder is characterized by black and white thinking, also known as splitting, and an overwhelming fear of abandonment. According to the DSM-V, one must show a pervasive pattern of five or more of the criteria. Frantic efforts to avoid real or perceived abandonment. Doesn't necessarily need to be actual abandonment. They might have just thought somebody's trying to abandon them. A pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization and devaluation. So this goes back to the splitting, the black and white thinking. When people in borderline, or people who have borderline personality disorder are in relationships, they often do something called splitting, which means that they go from thinking that their partner or the person that they're in a relationship with, it doesn't have to be romantic, it can be platonic or familial. They think they can go back and forth from thinking that that person is the best thing in the world to thinking that the person is the worst person in the entire world. They are the cause of all of their problems, absolutely terrible people. And then they can go right back to thinking how wonderful they are, they're perfect, absolutely wonderful people, and they can switch back and forth. And it makes a very unstable interpersonal relationship, as you can imagine, because it creates a very confusing and toxic environment for the other person. Next is markedly and persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. So people with borderline personality disorder often don't have a very secure sense of self. They don't really know who they are. People with borderline personality disorder are not unknown to be constantly changing their hairstyle, constantly changing how they look. They can have very serious alternating sense of self because they don't have one true self. I don't want to say that as a blanket statement, but it is very common for them to not have a good sense of self. So next is impulsivity in at least two areas that are potentially self-damaging, e.g. spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, or binge eating. So my mom has borderline personality disorder. My mom would often spend lots and lots of money that we did not have. And it was to the detriment of her and our family because we didn't have that money. But that's really not uncommon with borderline personality disordered people. It's an impulsivity. So here it says at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging. So I don't know about any of the other ones, but that was just an example. So they do have to have impulsivity in at least 2 areas. Next is recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, or threats of self-mutilating behavior. So unfortunately, with borderline personality disorder, it is very common for them to have suicidal ideation. It is also very common for them as a manipulation to threaten suicide or self-harm to get other people to stay. As we've stated, they have a fear of abandonment. So they can often use this to try and get people to stay, like, no, I'm going to hurt myself, or to get them to feel bad for them, whatever it is. I'm not saying that every time they do that is what their goal is, but that is something that is a part of it. And unfortunately, it can lead to people accidentally even killing themselves, not meaning to, because what they're trying to do was like a manipulation or a cry for help of some sort. And they do sometimes end up accidentally taking their own lives. And that's a really sad thing. Also, depression is a comorbidity of borderline personality. A comorbidity is just something that can sometimes be diagnosed alongside of another disorder. All right, so affective instability is the next one. Affective instability due to a marked reactivity of mood. So, for example, intense episodic dysphoria, irritability, or anxiety, usually lasting only a few hours and rarely more than a few days. So basically that their life is very unstable because of their reactivity of mood. So borderline people tend to be very reactive, as that states. They tend to have very big swings of emotions in short periods of time, and that creates a very unstable environment for themselves. Even though it's created by themselves, they are creating an unstable environment for themselves, which is not healthy. It creates a lot of instability, and their moods can be their worst enemies. You know, borderline is often, how I think of it, is it's kind of like bipolar, but super, super fast paced with the mood changes. For somebody with bipolar, they can have a mood change that lasts a week. So they can be very sad. That can even last for months. You know, they can be very sad and then go into mania for a long time. Somebody with borderline personality disorder, all of that can happen in one day. They can be really sad in the morning. They can be super happy in the middle of the day. They can be super sad at night, and then the next morning they may wake up and they'll hate the world, they'll be angry, and it's just a roller coaster of emotions. Right, next is chronic feelings of emptiness. So they fear abandonment a lot. This is usually caused by a childhood wound of some sort, usually a core issue here. And because they have such hard times creating long-lasting relationships and feeling secure in their relationships, they can have very serious chronic feelings of emptiness. They can often feel like nobody wants them. They can feel very empty, and it's part of what fuels their fear of abandonment. They need people and things to fill that emptiness. All right, next is inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling anger. So, for example, frequent displays of temper, constant anger, or recurrent physical fights. So as I stated before, they have very fast-moving changes of emotion. So this includes anger. When they get mad, it might be an overreaction. So like somebody might do something small and they might fly off the handle. This is an inappropriate gesture of anger. This is not appropriate for the level of whatever happened. So they can show very intense anger, and they can have a lot of trouble controlling their anger and go into rages. People with borderline personality disorder have not been known to display domestic violence or to engage in domestic violence and to be abusive, unfortunately, because of that. That doesn't mean every borderline personality person is like that. It just means that it is unfortunately something that can come along with having borderline personality or being in interpersonal relationships with people who may be very unstable in their borderline personality disorder and are prone to rage. So next and last is the transient stress-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. As I've stated multiple times now, very afraid of abandonment. Stress-related paranoid ideation can come into play with that. So for example, my mom's She has borderline personality. She was always paranoid that her boyfriend was cheating on her. She would go and circle his house late at night. She would get me up to go spy on him with her. Very strange stuff, and none of it was real, at least from what I could tell. And that's an example of paranoid ideation. They can be very sure that their partner is cheating on them, even if there's no real evidence. They can be sure that their partner is planning on leaving them. They can really play this stuff up in their heads. They can also have severe dissociative symptoms, meaning that they kind of go blank. They are not really there all there. They might kind of just pull away from their bodies for a little bit, just kind of check out for a while because of how much stress that they put themselves under mentally. And it's honestly a really sad thing. All right, so next up is histrionic personality disorder. Histrionic personality disorder is characterized by dramatic and unpredictable outbursts, which they use to gain attention. According to the DSM-V, it is a pervasive pattern of excessive emotionality and attention seeking, beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts as indicated by 5 or more of the following. They are uncomfortable in situations and are not the center of attention. Interaction with others is often characterized by inappropriate, sexually seductive, or provocative behavior. This is a very big hallmark of histrionic personality disorder. They show often very inappropriate, sexual advances, and what I mean by that is it's at inappropriate times. It's not really in the right context, and can overdo it in the provocative behavior. It can be very constant and very dramatic. Next up is displays rapidly shifting and shallow expression of emotions. So they can have very rapidly shifting emotions, as it states, and they can often show very shallow emotions. When I think of this, what I think of is like reality TV stars, kind of that dramatic behavior with not a lot of depth. It seems very shallow, very silly. So that's a display of shallow emotion. Constantly uses physical appearance to draw attention to self. Has style of speech that is excessively impressionistic or lacking in detail. So what that means is that when they speak, it can almost seem like a character. It can almost seem like fake. It's lacking. There's something a little bit off about it. So what I think of with this is I sometimes think of Paris Hilton. Back in the day, she was on a reality TV show. I didn't really watch that stuff, but from what I've seen, Paris Hilton often puts on sort of a character, and when she talks, it seems very ditzy and very strange. It doesn't seem very real. It doesn't seem genuine to her. It seems like a character, and that is an example of impressionistic or lacking in detail sort of speech. Next is shows self-dramatization, theatricality, and exaggerated expression of emotion. So basically, their emotions are always taken up a notch. They're always very dramatic with whatever they're experiencing. And it's usually to gain attention. So whatever they're feeling, they're going to take it up a notch so that they can get other people's attention and get the spotlight on them. Next is they're suggestible. So they can be very easily influenced by others or circumstances. Unfortunately, just like with all of the other personality disorders, this also has a comorbidity of substance abuse. Because of that, they can be very prone to peer pressure and influence of any kind, really. They are not very strong in what they want to do. They don't have very good boundaries. And the last is considers relationships to be more intimate than they actually are. So this is just, they may perceive a relationship that they're in, whether romantic or not, but it's very commonly romantic, to be much more deep than it actually is. They might think that the other person is so in love with them. They might think they have this very intimate connection. They may think that they are just so close, and the other person might be neither here nor there about them. They may not really care that much. So I have a couple of pictures up here. A lot of these people in these pictures, such as Jersey Shore, Paris Hilton. These are reality TV stars, and I think, I'm not saying that they have histrionic personality disorder, but reality TV often plays people up in such a way that it resembles this, not that they actually are. But in reality TV, people often put on a character. They're very dramatic. I know in Jersey Shore and in The Simple Life, they could be very over-sexualized, at least the women, to almost a comical point, and that was a focal point of the show. Over here is Anna Nicole Smith. Bless her poor heart. She obviously had a lot of things going on with her mentally, but she was often very overly sexual and inappropriately provocative at times. I'm not a prude in any way, but it just, the timing of how she would present some of the things was just a little bit, you could have saved not right now, Anna, not right now. Poor girl. Honestly, I felt real bad for her. But the last is antisocial personality disorder. So this was previously known as sociopathy. APD is characterized by an inability to care about other people's needs and feelings, delinquency, and little to no remorse because of lack of empathy. So here's the DSM-V criteria to be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. A failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest. So basically meaning you're getting into trouble with the law. Deceitfulness as indicated by repeating lying, using of aliases, or conning others for personal profit or pleasure. So antisocial personality disorder, these people are often very much schemers. They're constantly scheming, lying, conning people, doing whatever they can to get their personal pleasure, whatever profit, money, whatever it is, they will scheme to get it. Next up is impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. So they're very impulsive, basically. They don't have a lot of long-term thinking. It's very short-term. It's like, I'm going to get what I want. I'm going to get it now. Doesn't really matter what the consequences are. That's just the price of business. All right. Next up is irritability and aggressiveness, as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults. So because they're very impulsive, they're also very irritable and aggressive. That is not a good combination. They do often get into physical fights and often harm others as a result. Next is reckless disregard for safety of self or others. So they also have they don't have empathy. Because of that, they don't care about your safety. They don't care about you. But it's also interesting in the fact that they don't really care about themselves in regards to the law and to safety as well. They are not caring about the rules. And I'll get back to that in a sec. Next is consistent irresponsibility as indicated by repeated failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations. So they are not it's not very easy for them to keep a job because of their personality type, because of their disregard for rules and their tendencies to get into physical fights and inability to control their anger. It's not like a very good way to sustain a job, and they often have a hard time keeping a job for a long period of time, and they have a hard time controlling their finances as well, so that isn't very compatible with just being a business-oriented person. So financial obligations, it can mean that they don't pay their bills on time, they can be in debt a lot of the time, because again, they don't have long-term thinking usually. It's very short-term, and because of that, they land themselves in a lot of hot water with finances. And then last is a lack of remorse as indicated by being indifferent to or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another. So like I had stated, they don't have empathy, don't have remorse, and they're indifferent to hurting people. They can sometimes rationalize behavior, but overall, they really just don't care. They don't care if they hurt you. They'll rationalize it in their head like, well, I needed this, so I had to hurt them. So they have very severe lack of empathy. It's a little bit different than narcissism in their lack of empathy, because a narcissist usually cares what other people think, at least, and they usually have something that is somewhat resembling empathy at the very least. But a person with antisocial personality disorder doesn't have that. They don't have even that. So I'm going to get back to reckless disregard for safety and others. It's thought that people with antisocial personality disorder don't have a proper SNS, so they don't have a sympathetic nervous response that is in line with the rest of the population. When other people experience fear or humiliation, our heart rate starts to speed up, we get sweaty, our sympathetic nervous system is reacting. People with antisocial personality disorder are thought to have not as reactive as sympathetic nervous systems. So that means that when they're getting pulled over by a policeman, they don't have that same sense of fear or worry that we do. They don't get that heart beating and that racing, so that makes it much easier for them to kind of disregard these things. So antisocial personality disorder, the DSM-V does not recognize psychopathy or sociopathy, so they don't recognize psychopaths or sociopaths. What you'll find in the DSM is antisocial personality disorder, and psychopaths and sociopaths fall under that category. The idea here is that a psychopath is born. They're born with something going on. A sociopath is thought to be made. There's no conclusive evidence on that, but that's just the idea. So here we have a couple of pictures. Here's Vlad the Impaler. He is what Dracula was actually based off of. He was a very ruthless warlord. He killed and tortured hundreds of thousands of people just for fun. He had a specific torture where he would have goats lick the skin off of the bottom of his enemy's feet, and he'd watch. I don't know what to say. Here is Joffrey from Game of Thrones. I'm sure anybody who's seen Game of Thrones knows how insufferable he is and how absolutely sociopathic he was. Here's Hannibal Lecter. Oh, Nate Jacobs, go back. That's, by the way, that's Nate Jacobs from Euphoria. If anybody's seen Euphoria, I decided to just put something more current up here, and I know Euphoria is really popular with people my age. But he would be more of like a sociopath, maybe a psychopath, but also falls under that. But Hannibal Lecter, what I was saying is I haven't seen Hannibal Lecter personally, but I do know he's a cannibal. This shows very antisocial personality traits, but he'd be considered more of like a psychopath. But yeah, so antisocial personality disorder can be very dangerous, but there are also, when somebody with antisocial personality disorder manifests their disorder positively, it can result in things like neurosurgeons and people who are in jobs of that sort that require like surgery or needing to be calm in very stressful situations. So it doesn't always mean that they're going to grow up to be Vlad the Impaler. They can function normally, and they can even use some of their what we'd consider disadvantages, or at least what we'd consider abnormalities, to their advantage, you know? So a neurosurgeon is often displays psychopathic traits or sociopathic traits where they don't have the proper sympathetic nervous system responses that the rest of society usually does. But that's actually great because that means that they can stay calm under very intensely stressful situations, and it can lead to saving people's lives. So it doesn't mean they're always going to be Hannibal Lecter, basically, but when we think of antisocial personality disorder, we can think of more of the extreme behaviors in people and some of the more scary manifestations. And that is often what we see people modeled off after in like horror movies and such, people with antisocial personality disorder. All right, so that's it. I know this is kind of long. I'm sorry about that. I was trying to keep it under, but a girl can talk. This is my favorite subject. So there you go.